Good evening, student pharmacists, and welcome to the fourth and final evening of the APhA-ASP webinar week. We really appreciate you sticking with us to the end, and to close us out, we have a wonderful presentation from Dr. Brent Reed, which is named To Do, To Done, and it's all about productivity, workflow, what work-life balance really means, and so many more good and useful topics that student pharmacists can use now and also beyond their time as student pharmacists. So before we get started, I'll go ahead and walk you through some of our procedures for tonight. You can call in with either your telephone or you can use your microphone on your computer. It really comes down to personal preference. Sometimes telephone can be a bit clearer, so whatever your preference is. Also, to be respectful of others, we make sure and try and mute everyone in order to diminish any type of background noise so we don't have that background noise coming through during our presenter's presentation. In addition, if you have any types of questions that you may have during the presentation about the subject matter specifically or about anything else related to the presentation, go ahead and use that chat box that came up on the right or left of your screen, wherever that control panel pane came up when you logged on. Go ahead and enter your question into that box throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait until the very end. We want to go ahead and compile your questions and make sure that we have everything ready for the end of the presentation for the Q&A section as well. So we'll probably just be sticking to that chat box rather than the vocal question asking function. So go ahead and make sure to type your questions as we go along. And just so you know, all of your questions are anonymous, and it's essentially just between you and our staff member who's compiling the questions. So anything that you might be wondering, someone else is probably wondering as well. So my name is Nick Capote, and I'm your APhA-ASP National President, and I am privileged to introduce our speaker tonight. His name is Dr. Brent Reed, and he's actually finishing out his time as a new practitioner this year, and he's offered his time and his expertise for our topic due to done. So Dr. Brent Reed started his journey through pharmacy school at University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and he got quickly involved on the local level as well as the national level. He was actually on the Communications Standing Committee, and then he was one of our APhA-ASP national presidents. After completing pharmacy school, he did a couple of years of residency at University of North Carolina, where he worked for a short time as a clinical pharmacist specialist in the cardiology service in North Carolina. And he recently accepted a position in Baltimore, so he's all over the place, as an assistant professor at the University of Maryland College of Pharmacy, where he is a clinical pharmacy specialist at University of Maryland Medical Center. He's also developed his own cardiology-themed blog called The Unit, and also posts for heartmeds.org, which is managed by another cardiology specialist at University of Michigan. Brent has also showcased his skills by playing in a band with University of Tennessee professors and other faculty members. So with all of these things Brent does, he really had no choice but to develop those productivity and workflow skills that go along with managing so many different tasks and projects. So without any further ado, Dr. Reed, you're up.
Thank you, Nick. I didn't realize you were going to bring up the band piece. That was sort of a surprise. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. For those of you that are joining us on the East Coast, for sticking with us and staying up late. Hopefully, it'll be worth your time. You'll be able to walk away with some useful pieces of information tonight. So the first thing we'll do to sort of get started, I just have a quick poll to get a pulse of what you guys think. So how much productivity do you think the average American worker loses in a day? Do you think it's A, 30 minutes, B, 1 hour, C, 2 hours, or D, greater than 3 hours? I'll give you sort of a few seconds to fill the poll out. All right, Lynette, what do we got there for poll results?
All right, so it looks like 66% said more than three hours, and 35% said more than 2 hours, and about 2% said 30 minutes.
Okay. So y'all are actually pretty close. So when you look at it, the average individual loses between 2 to 3 hours of productivity in a single 8-hour workday. Now, that's probably less for us healthcare professionals, but then again, how many healthcare professionals are really only working 8-hour days? And actually, we millennials are the worst offenders. 75% of us consistently waste time at work. Now, although we have more tools for productivity today than all of the generations before us combined, we are actually less productive than ever before. So really the theme of this webinar is creating an organized system for action so that you can get from to do to done. Now, I certainly don't claim to be an expert on productivity by any means. Most of the content that I'll be using in this webinar comes from books and articles that I've sort of read over the years. And honestly, I really sort of lacked a system that brought all of those disparate things together until I was introduced to a book by David Allen and his methodology called Getting Things Done. And so I'll be covering some of those basics in the first half of the presentation tonight. But before we get started, I just want to share a few sort of broad lessons that I've sort of learned over the years and why I sort of needed a system for staying productive. So number one, nothing will ever be perfect. So with the internet, we have access to unlimited resources. So really no project is ever going to be perfect. But there is a diminishing return on the time that we spend trying to make it perfect. Number two, there's no such thing as work-life balance. Now, just hear me out on this one. So the whole idea of work-life balance was born out of a time when people left the workplace and it rarely followed them home. But today, the boundaries between personal and professional life are almost entirely gone. And furthermore, there are so many things that aren't considered, quote, work, but it still requires significant budgeting of our time and energy. So things like managing your finances, learning to play a musical instrument, or maybe having a successful relationship. All of those things, they require significant budgeting of time. And unfortunately, if we just categorize those things as life versus work, sometimes we fail to commit the time and energy necessary to enjoy them, and so that our time and energy just gets eaten up by work. Number three, multitasking is a myth. Now, I know this is probably going to be hard to accept for some because honestly, as a group, we millennials pride ourselves on being great multitaskers. But the truth is, we're actually the worst at it, and that's a point I'll come back to a little bit later in the presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Now, not much research has been done on what makes people productive, but there is some data out there that comes from studies of New Year's resolutions. Now, I'm sure you're sort of used to this, the all too familiar experience of how you go to the gym on January 2nd and you find yourself waiting forever just to use your favorite workout machines, your favorite area of the gym. But you give it some time, and probably by the middle of the time the middle of the month rolls around, you're back to being one of the few people there. Now, there are actually some numbers to support these findings. For those that don't set goals, less than 1 in 20 are able to change something about their life long term. Now, for those who do set goals, this number improves to about 50%. But there's some interesting trends that come out of those that do. So 25% of goals are broken within the first week of setting them. And this trend continues until about the 3-month mark where it really plateaus. So in other words, people who consistently worked on their goals for 3 months, those are the people who experience long-lasting change in their life. So how do people get over that 3-month hump? Well, a recent study showed that those who wrote down their goals were 50% more likely to achieve them. And then these gains rose to 75% in the subgroup who wrote action plans, reviewed them weekly, and then sent progress updates to their colleagues. And this point here is really what illustrates the first of 2 underlying philosophies of the Getting Things Done methodology, which is getting everything out of your head, off your desk, out of your email inbox, every piece of information that's competing for your attention, and integrating it into a single workflow that works for you. Because honestly, your mind is great for analyzing, it's great for processing, brainstorming, being creative, but really your mind's not a great storage bank. So you really have to get that stuff out of your head. And honestly, getting it out of your mind, it also forces you to convert some of those abstract thoughts into concrete ideas so that you can move forward them and turn them into action. Now, the second philosophy is learning how to make immediate decisions on information as it comes into your system. So that is, not leaving it on your mind or sitting in your email inbox or maybe sitting on a Post-it note somewhere, but actually doing something with it. So with that, we'll go ahead and move into the getting things done process. So to start, I'd like to do another quick poll of the audience, just to see which of the following things do you use to promote your own productivity right now. And this is where you can select all apply. So do you, A, use a notebook or a planner, B, a calendar, C, a to-do list, D, Post-it notes or visual reminders, or E, do you use productivity apps like Evernote, OneNote, To-Do, etc. So I'll give you a few moments to punch in your results. Okay, so Lynette, what do we got here for results?
All right, so it looks like for this one, around 85% has a to-do list, 83% has a calendar, 73% has a notebook, and 59% has a Post-it note, and 29% has an app.
Okay, so it sounds like a wide variety of different tools being used. So now I won't take a poll on this next question, but for those of you that make to-do lists, how often do you find that at the end of the day you still have more left to do than you've crossed off of your to-do list, or that you've left the most important thing sitting there on your to-do list not being crossed off? Now, a common reason for this is that we spend most of our day in reactive mode. That is, we're putting out fires rather than tackling the most important things that we need to get accomplished. Now, what I like about the Getting Things Done system is that it really emphasizes working in proactive mode. And additionally, you can customize the system to make it work for you. So it can be electronic or it can be paper, as long as everything gets processed the same way. Now, you can even incorporate many of the things that you're already doing to stay productive. Now, personally, I use Evernote because it allows me to do everything in the Getting Things Done system, and it syncs across all of my devices. And so that's why you'll see some of the screenshots from Evernote tonight. But there are a variety of other things out there that you can use, and it can be as simple as a notebook, or it can be one of these sort of productivity apps. But you can sort of customize the system to work for you. So here's what the process looks like as a whole. Now, I know this can probably be a little visually overwhelming at first, so we're going to walk through each of these steps one by one. Now, for those of you that attended this webinar the first time, I've sort of rearranged this part of the presentation a little bit based on some feedback that I got. So if you do read David Allen's materials, this will come in a little bit different order than how he does it, but I think it makes a little bit more sense. So number one, the first thing to do is collect all of the information that is competing for your attention and put it into one system. So this includes emails, paperwork, projects, Post-it notes, financial statements, grocery lists, all the information that's competing for your attention. Now, if you're starting this process for the first time, you're probably going to have a lot of stuff to collect. I mean, it took me like a weekend to get all the stuff in to one place. But once you sort of get your system started, then you can just process information as it comes along. And really the bottom line is that no information should enter your brain without having a place where it can be stored outside of your brain. Now here I've listed it as an inbox, but really this is way more than just your email inbox. Now for me, Evernote serves as my, quote, information inbox. So if I get an email that involves getting something done, I'll copy the information out of that email and put it in Evernote, and then I file that email away. Same thing goes for paperwork. I'll either scan the document in, or I'll just write what action I need to take on that document and put it into Evernote, and then actually file the physical document away. So that way I don't have all these different inputs of information competing for my attention. I really have it all in a single system. So I'm using Evernote to really compile all that stuff into one system. So the next step is to organize all of that existing information into a few containers. Now, we'll come back to how you use those containers here in a little bit and how you integrate them into your workflow, but I think it's helpful to just kind of know where all that information should go. So the first container is trash, which is pretty self-explanatory. Anything that you don't think that you're going to need for later, just trash it. The revisit list, now I think this is sort of a unique feature of the Getting Things Done system. This is a list for all those things that maybe you want to do at some point. So maybe it's something like learn a new language, or maybe you would like to go back to school to get another degree. But it's not something that is very urgent or very important to do at this moment. So I use this revisit list. This is where I make note of all those sort of random thoughts that come up during the day. So things like research ideas that might pop into my head while we're on rounds, or maybe there's like a hobby or something, or a place I'd like to travel sometime. I'll put this in my revisit list. This really accomplishes two things. One, it keeps me from forgetting about it. You know, those thoughts of something that I want to do that if I don't write it down, maybe we'll forget about it later on. And two, it's a way to get it out of my mind and into somewhere that I can refer back to it later, so that it's not occupying my thoughts anymore. Now the third thing is reference folders, and really this is exactly what it sounds like. These are it's just cold storage for information that you may need to refer to later, but really it has no business occupying your attention in the meantime. Now for projects, you should have both a master project list and a folder that contains your plans for each individual project. So to show you what that looks like, again, I'll refer to a screenshot from Evernote. So this is what my master project list looks like. So the master project list it's really helpful for determining whether you're able to take on any additional projects when you get asked. So I keep this in sort of my main notebook here. This is Brent's notebook, and it's the project list here. It has all my ongoing projects. Now, Alan recommends that you have a separate folder for all of your project plans, and that each individual project has its own separate file. So as an example, I have all my projects sort of categorized here by type. So you can see personal, practice, professional, etc. Now here's an example of what an individual project note looks like. So you can design them any way that you'd like, but essentially at the very top I have all the action items for this particular note. So this is rotation improvements. So for my student and resident rotations, these are things I would like to do to improve that rotation experience. So at the very top, I have all the actions that I'd like to do to improve the experience. And then if you were to scroll down, you would see all my notes related to these action steps. Now the reason that Alan recommends putting all of your project plans into a separate folder is because if you can imagine, if you had these kinds of notes sitting out there all the time, that's going to become overwhelming visually and distracting. And honestly, it may even paralyze the process, because you look at this and be like, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do on this one individual project. And so it'll prevent you from doing some of the other things that you need to get done. So we'll come back to this action list here within this individual project a little bit later when we talk about the process itself. But let's go back to some of the other containers first. So the awaiting list, this is a list of all the things that you have delegated to other people, and you're simply waiting on them to get back to you. And so this is another critical piece of the system. This is to prevent you from forgetting about the things that maybe you've asked other people to do. The calendar is pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially some way of viewing your calendar. This can be done in Outlook. It can be done in Google Calendar. But really the bottom line is that you should have some way of viewing or being able to sync all of your respective calendars together, being able to see it in one place. Now most mobile phones do this, and it's not that difficult to import or export calendars into most email clients. So as long as you can get all of your calendars into one place, that's the key. And then finally here at the bottom is your actions list. And so this is like one list that is sort of a targeted to-do list. It's not something that you recreate every day, but it's rather a place where you put all of the urgent and or important action items that you need to get done soon. So for me, this really represents the items that I need to get done really within the next week or within the next several days or so. Now, this is also the list that if you have any spare time that comes up during your day, you can refer to this list and try to knock out some of those things. Or if you know you're going to have, for example, maybe an hour later in your day or maybe an hour tomorrow to work on something, you refer to this list and see if you can fill that time with something from your actions list. But again, we'll come back to that in a few moments. So we've talked about all the buckets that sort of, all the containers that make up the system. So let's kind of walk through the process itself. So that's the third step, is how do you process information that enters your system? Now this is both for all that information that you collected in your inbox to start, or this is information that enters your system as it comes throughout the day. So here you're asking yourself a few simple questions. So the first question with that piece of information that you get is it actionable? If it's not, it either gets trashed, put on your revisit list, or put in a reference folder to be stored away. So that way it's not competing for your attention anymore. If it is actionable, then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the next action? Now, if the next action is the only step necessary for getting the task done, you can move on to the next step. But if it is if that next action is just one of several steps that's necessary for getting the whole task done, then it becomes part of a project file. Now, this is a key step to the getting things done process, and honestly, it was definitely one of the most challenging for me to do at first, because Alan, he's pretty strict about considering any task that requires more than one step as being a project, even if it's something that's really simple to do. Otherwise, this is the kind of thing where it can be really easy to slip into reactive mode, and the next thing you know, you've wasted 20 to 30 minutes of your day on unplanned activity, which may significantly impact the things that you had planned to get done in the day. So, in other words, these are the kinds of things that keep you from being able to cross off that most important thing to do on your to-do list. Now, for me, these multi-step projects, a project file just includes creating a new note in Evernote. So you can see here what this looks like. It's just a blank note. So oftentimes, I don't really have anything to do with it, but by creating a note that serves as sort of a trigger to me, a placeholder that I have a new project to plan. Now, if you choose to go the paper route, perhaps this is putting a new page in your notebook that simply has the title of the project that you want to work on. Now, we'll come back to project files a little bit later, but for now, once you've created that file, you can return to the task at hand and move on to the next question, which is, can I do it in 2 minutes or less? Now, this is another step where Alan is also really disciplined. 2 minutes is enough time to really get some basic tasks done without it having a significant impact on the rest of your day. But tasks exceeding 2 minutes, those are the kinds of things that can really derail you and prevent you from getting a lot of things done. If it can be done in under 2 minutes, just do it. Go ahead and get it off your mind and out of your workflow forever. Now, if it's not something that can be done in less than 2 minutes, which is probably most often the case, then you ask yourself the next question, which is, am I the right person to do it? If you are not the right person to do it, then you delegate that task to whoever you feel like is the right person to do it, but it doesn't go away. You take that and put it on your awaiting list so you can remember what sort of things you have asked other people to do or to help you out with. Now, if you are the right person to do it, you have two options. So if it has to be done on or by a certain day, then you put it on your calendar to do at that specific time. So let's say, for example, you have some sort of appointment that takes an hour. You go ahead and put that on your calendar to do it at that time. Now, if it doesn't have to be done on or by a certain day, you put it onto an actions list. And you can put it onto one of two types of action lists, your main action list that I talked about earlier, or the individual project action list. Again, that's something that we'll come back to in a few moments. Now, before we move on to the next step, I think it's kind of helpful to run through a couple of examples to really illustrate how this processing step works. So let's say for the first example, we'll start with something simple. So let's say I get a text message from my banking app to say that my electric bill is due on the 28th. So I go ahead and it enters my sort of inbox of information. I ask, is it something that's actionable? Yes. So then I ask myself, well, what is the next action? Well, the next action is just to pay the bill. So it's a single step. So I don't have to create a project file. I ask myself, is it something that's going to take less than 2 minutes? Well, since I can do this all from my mobile banking app, which honestly takes me less than 30 seconds at most, I just go ahead and knock that task out. So now that thing is gone forever, and I don't have to worry about it again or worry about it occupying my attention. Now, as a second example, let's do something a little bit more complex. So let's say the chair of the admissions committee here at the School of Pharmacy drops by my office with a list of applicants to review and evaluate prior to our meeting next Friday. So again, I ask myself the first question, which is the task actionable? So the answer to that is yes. So then I ask, well, what's the next action? Well, the next action is to evaluate them, which again, it's essentially a one-step process, so I really don't need to create a project file for it. But again, I ask myself, is this something that I can do in 2 minutes? Well, based on the previous times that I've reviewed applicants, I know that it probably takes me about an hour or so to do, so it's not something that I can do right now, or otherwise I'll never get all the other things done that I had already planned to do today. So I go ahead and move on to the next question, which is, am I the right person to do it? Well, certainly this is definitely one of those things that I would like to delegate to other people, but unfortunately, being a member of the admissions committee, it's sort of one of my responsibilities to do, so there's not really anybody that I can give it to, so I can either put it on my calendar or put it on an actions list. Well, because I've been given a specific deadline, and I know that it takes me about an hour to do, I just go ahead and bring up my calendar, find an open hour block on there, and just go ahead and put review admissions committee applicants so that I can go ahead and do that. Now, for the last example, this one's probably the most complex. So this is an actual project, and this is an example that I'll come back to several times to kind of give you an example of how you can handle a specific project. So let's say I got an email from one of my hospital managers asking me to write a guideline on the use of IV ibuprofen or Flolan at our institution. So again, I ask myself, is the task actionable? Yes, it's something I need to act on. So I ask myself, well, what's the next action? Well, writing a new hospital guideline is complex. It's not something that I could just do in a single step or even 2 steps. I mean, this is going to require a lot of steps, like doing background research, seeking reviewers to look at the first draft, putting a second draft together, on and on. So the first thing that I do is I just create a project file in Evernote called ibuprofen guideline. Again, sort of like the blank note that I referred to earlier. And then I return to the process and ask myself, well, what's the next action? Well, in this case, although I have an idea of what steps the project will entail, I'm not exactly sure where I should start first. So my immediate next action is that I need to develop a plan for doing this project. So I come up with the action of develop plan for ibuprofen guideline. So I move on to this next question. So is developing a plan for this ibuprofen guideline, is that going to take me less than 2 minutes to plan the project? Well, it's definitely not. That's going to take me probably 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour. So I move on to the last question, which is, am I the right person to do it? Well, I know several colleagues who could do it, and I'm sure they would be certainly willing to help me out, but since my manager asked me to do it, I might as well take the lead on it. Now, since she didn't give me a firm deadline or like a specific time that it needs to get done, I don't need to put it on my calendar like I did for the previous example. And it's also, because of the scope of the project, it's not something that needs to get done between now and the end of the week. So I create an action item in the project file for that guideline to come back to when I have the time. So here I've added the action item to develop a plan for the ibuprofen guideline. Now, if the project was more urgent, I wouldn't put it on the actions list in the individual project file. I would put it on my main actions list so that I could come back to within the next several days. All right, so moving on to the fourth step. So this is to regularly review your system so that you can be proactive about keeping all of your projects and your tasks moving forward. Because obviously, storing things away in things like project files and lists and all that stuff, that's not going to be helpful unless you regularly review that information and act on it. So one of the biggest keys to the Getting Things Done system is the weekly review. So here you set aside about 30 minutes to an hour each week to review your entire system, and you use this to build your main action list and your calendar for the upcoming week. So first, you start with your calendar and your current actions list from the previous week. Is there anything that you weren't able to accomplish last week? And maybe ask yourself why that was, and is that item still relevant for the upcoming week? If so, go ahead and put it on next week's action list. Next, review your awaiting list. So go back through and look at all the stuff that you've maybe delegated to other people to do. Is there a deadline that's maybe rapidly approaching for one of those projects? Or if there is maybe something that somebody hasn't touched base with you in a while, maybe you need to add an action step to reach out to that person and see where things are in the process. The most important thing to do is to review all of your active project files. So this is where you think about which are important to be worked on right now versus maybe those that could maybe wait for a little bit longer. Now, if you've already developed some actionable items for those projects, so for example, remember towards the very beginning of the presentation where I had a copy of the rotation improvements. So maybe some of those are things that I want to work on this upcoming week. I'll copy and paste a few of those out of that note and put it on my main actions list to do for the upcoming week. Now, if there are things that you know are going to take a certain amount of time, just go ahead and block off time on your calendar to do them. So again, using an example from before, I said I figured it was probably going to take me about an hour or so to plan how I intend to tackle that FlowLand guideline, an APhA-ASP guideline. So to do this, I'll go ahead and block off an hour on my calendar in the upcoming week to knock that out. Now personally, just this one step alone, blocking off time to work on specific projects, that has been one of the biggest contributors to my productivity, because I don't spend sort of any time wondering, what do I need to get done today? Essentially, I already have an agenda for the day already planned out. Also, if you're one of those that you share your calendar with maybe your boss or coworkers, and you maybe have people that put meetings on your calendar based on your availability, I feel like blocking off time to work on projects also prevents people from plopping down meetings onto your calendar at the last minute. So I feel like that's also been a huge help there as well. And then finally, by committing blocks of time to certain projects, it really sort of helps me visualize whether maybe I'm taking on too much, or maybe I have some room to take on new projects, or maybe it's time to look at that revisit list for something that one of those hobbies or one of those trips that I'd like to take. I can start planning for one of those. Now here's an example of what one of my calendars looks like for a typical week. So as you can see, there are like some specific things that are recurring things. So for example, I block out 8 to 2 o'clock every day, or 8 to 1:30 for patient care, for rounds, for following up on patient care activities. And there are also some specifically scheduled meetings. So for example, the Heart Transplant Selection Conference that we have every Monday is on there. One of our professional development seminars is on there. But outside of that, I've blocked out time for each individual project. So you can see here, I blocked off an hour from 4:30 to 5:30 on Wednesday afternoon to work on that APhA-ASP guideline. So I already know that day that I have set aside time to work on that. So we'll come back to the calendar a little bit later. So now that you have an idea of what your upcoming week looks like, and you don't have to completely fill it like that was a particularly busy week. I usually try to leave some open spaces on the calendar, but as you sort of have an idea of what your upcoming week looks like, then you can take a look at that revisit list. So maybe there's something new that you want to undertake from there, and you can go ahead and schedule time for that. Now, one question that comes up commonly when I've done this workshop before, what's the best time to do the weekly review? Well, most people do their review on Friday near the end of the workday. So that way you can knock out any last-minute action items, delegate tasks, or really try to leave the office with a plan for the upcoming week and you can go into the weekend feeling relaxed. Now, I usually do mine on Saturday or Sunday because I feel like at that time I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed, a little bit motivated to plan for the upcoming week. Because I'll be honest, on Friday afternoon, I just want to know where happy hour is, and certainly I'm not thinking about all the stuff that I need to get done for the next week. So you'll just need to identify the time that works best for you. So finally, you should do a very brief daily review of your upcoming calendar and your actions list. And so this is really helpful for any of those time-sensitive items that may have come along since your last weekly review. So I usually try to do this the night before so that I'm not starting the next day in reactive mode for maybe any urgent items that have come up since the last time I've done the weekly review. So finally, once you've sort of set up a system that facilitates action, you've got your containers figured out, you've got the process down, now you can just focus on doing what you do best, and that's knocking projects out. Now, many of the things you'll have already scheduled time for on your calendar, and so you already have set aside time knowing what you need to get done. So let's go back to that APhA-ASP guideline that I talked about earlier. Now, recall that I set aside an hour on Wednesday afternoon to work on planning that project. So during that time, in that hour on Wednesday afternoon, I'm thinking about, well, what are all the steps necessary for getting that project done? So I'm really planning the project at this point. So some things that probably need to be done are I need to develop a timeline for it to be completed. So maybe I need to reach out and ask my manager, when would you like the guideline completed? I need to perform some background research to put it together. I probably should identify some collaborators either to help me write the guideline or at the very least to review it for accuracy and make sure I've not left out anything important. I'm going to have to write a first draft and submit it to reviewers or maybe my physician collaborators. And then once that comes back, I need to incorporate those revisions based on reviewer feedback and create a final draft. So all of those become action items in the APhA-ASP guideline project file, and now I can cross off that action at the top that I put on there earlier, which was to develop a plan for the APhA-ASP guideline. Now let's say that maybe that only took me 15 minutes because I've written a hospital guideline before, I kind of know what goes into it, so it only took me a little bit of time to plan this one. So whatever time I have left that I budgeted that hour for, now I can go ahead and get started on other parts of this project. So maybe at this time I can go ahead and start developing a tentative timeline, or maybe I even want to start identifying some references so that I can perform my background search. I can also use this time to look, do I have some time later in the week that I can block off some more time to get this done? Because maybe I hear back from my manager and she wants it done in like 3 weeks, so I should probably start working on a few of these things a little bit sooner than I expected. So I can maybe take one of these and schedule an hour block later in the week to knock out some of these other remaining tasks. Otherwise, for whatever I don't get done in that hour, I leave these tasks here so that when I come back from my weekly review, I can pull some of them from this project and put it on my main actions list. Now, like I said earlier, I like to leave some time open each day so that I can review my actions list and maybe tackle any miscellaneous things, or maybe something a little bit more urgent has come up that I need to go ahead and knock out sooner rather than later. So if you find that you have any time that gets freed up in your day, to decide on which items from your main action list to tackle, you should ask yourself a few questions. So one, what can I get done where I am? So is this something that I can get done at home? Is it something that I have to be at the office to get done? If it's a grocery list, I mean, obviously you have to be at the grocery store to get that done. So you have to ask, can I get this done where I am? Number two, how much time do I need to get this done? So for example, is this something that I can knock out in the 10 minutes I have between meetings, or is it something that I should probably save for when I've got maybe an hour or a couple of hour blocks of time to do? Third, how much energy do I have? So for example, if you're sitting at home after a long day and you want to be a little bit productive, it's probably not the best time to tackle writing a manuscript or starting a new research project. And then finally, which is the most important or urgent to get done? Now, I also tend to ask myself these questions when I'm scheduling tasks for the upcoming week as part of that weekly review. So those tasks that really require a lot of brain power, so things that require brainstorming, things that require creativity, I try to schedule those as early in the day as possible when my mind is fresh and I can focus. Also, if I know, like, maybe I have to go across campus for a meeting one afternoon, I'm going to schedule tasks around that meeting that I can actually get done away from my desk. So maybe I need to touch base with one of my managers about a project, and her office is on the way. I would go ahead and schedule that task while I'm going to that meeting across campus. So it's really just sort of a way to maximize your task based on where you are, what sort of resources you have at the time, and how much energy you've got. So now that we've sort of talked about the process as a whole, I want to sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about what are some of those pitfalls that prevent you from getting things done. So even if you've got your process down, you've got your containers, you've got sort of the way that you deal with things as in your workflow system, there's still going to be those things that come up in your day that try to keep you away or keep you from getting things done. So what are some of those pitfalls, and what can we do about them? So again, I want to start with a quick poll. So in the last hour, which of the following things has competed for your attention? And so again, this is one of those things where you can check all that apply. So was it email, was it a text message, or maybe a Google chat, social media, so a Facebook alert, a tweet, or maybe some other push alert. So again, check all that apply. I'll give you a few moments to enter your choices. Okay, so Lynette, what have we got for results here?
Okay, for this one, it looks like text message and chat is at 83%, email is at 71%, social media is at 58%, and other push alert is at 31%.
Okay. So seems like a wide variety of different things competing for our attention. And honestly, the never-ending competition for our attention has become ubiquitous. I mean, multitasking was once heralded. I mean, it was once thought to be the only way to survive in sort of an increasingly digital society. But honestly, the evidence shows otherwise. Actually, research indicates that humans are not capable of multitasking. What we perceive as multitasking is really just rapid task switching. And honestly, it comes at a significant cost. So Ophir and colleagues, in their work on cognitive processing, they performed several studies looking at heavy multitaskers with low multitaskers on tests of cognitive performance. Compared to light multitaskers, heavy multitaskers were less effective at filtering out both irrelevant environmental stimuli and at filtering out irrelevant thoughts. Additionally, heavy multitaskers were also less effective at task switching. So, in other words, the individuals who multitask the most were actually the worst at it. In another study, Meyer and colleagues, in their cognitive theory on multimedia learning, they described this process as cognitive overload, which is really a condition where your cognitive processing exceeds the available capacity. And this occurs most commonly when the incidental processing required for things like text messaging, Facebook, Pinterest, all that stuff outstrips the far more taxing brain power that you need for things like critical thinking or being creative. And honestly, it can really hamper our performance. In a study by Altman and colleagues, interruptions of less than 3 seconds, so less than 3 seconds, doubled the rate of processing errors, and that interruptions of nearly 5 seconds tripled the error rate. It's also something that's been associated with lower GPA, lower test scores, and recently AHRQ identified multitasking as a significant contributor to adverse events. I was at the National Precepting Conference earlier today, and the keynote speaker also quoted another study where they looked at people who responded to push alerts versus those that didn't, and tested their ability to perform on cognitive tasks. And they found that the people who responded to push alerts actually performed worse on cognitive tests than those that were high. If you think about that, it really has a huge impact on your ability to do work. So in truth, though, multitasking can be a hard habit to break. So what are some practical things that you can do right now? So first, you can start by reclaiming your inbox. So I'm going to go through a few strategies for doing so. So first, you can integrate your email into your workflow. So for most of us, our email inbox, it only serves as one of several inputs of information into our workflow system. So because it's only one of several, email should not serve as your system. Otherwise, it would be easy to forget about all those things that happen outside of email. In fact, I'm sure there's probably some of us on here that, or maybe at one time or another, have been guilty of saying, well, why don't you email me that request just so I can make sure that it gets on my to-do list, because that's the only way that we sort of have a strategy for getting things on our to-do list. But honestly, in the end, that just leads to our inbox becoming this huge black hole of items on which we've not made a decision on, or even worse yet, those things that we don't want to make a decision on. But actually, I found that the getting things done system, so that process that I went through earlier, it actually works really well for email. So here's a screenshot of my email inbox. So this is, I just finished reviewing all the emails for the day. So this is one of those rare occasions when it's completely empty. But when an email comes in and it's not actionable, I immediately file it away. Either I put it in the trash, I file it in a reference folder, or I put a line about it in my revisit file in Evernote to come back a later time, and I file that email away. Now, if it's something actionable, the 2-minute clock starts when I begin reading it. So if it's a single step and I can do that task in less than 2 minutes, I'll just go ahead and do it and then file that email away in a reference folder. Now, if I can't do it in under 2 minutes, I will put it in my actions list in Evernote to do when I have time later in the day, and I will file that email in the action folder here within the inbox. Now, if it's a multi-step project, so not something that I can do in a single step, I make a note of it in either its associated project file in Evernote, or if it's a brand new project, I'll create a new note and then again file that email away in my action folder. If it's something that can be delegated, I will forward that email or respond or find some way to delegate that task, and then that email gets filed away in my waiting folder. But in the end, the goal is to have a completely empty inbox at some point in the day. Now, just like that, your main actions list that you created, that serves as your prompt for those emails that you have filed in your action and waiting folder. So the key is not just putting them in these two folders, but also putting something on your main action list to cue you to go back and look at that particular email, either for the multi-step project or the single-step project. Now, a second strategy for reclaiming your inbox is to schedule time for email. So maybe put 30 minutes on your calendar day that's blocked off just for reading and responding to email. Or you may find that you need a lot more time to do that. So maybe it's 2 30-minute increments, or maybe it's 15-minute increments that happen 3 or 4 times throughout your day. Otherwise, email is one of those things where it can be really easy to get sidetracked. And next thing you know, again, you have that most important thing on your to-do list that you're never able to get to. Third, when scheduling time for email, save it for your time of lowest productivity. Or, as one of my mentors does, save it for when you're winding down with a glass of wine. Just make sure that it's not multiple glasses of wine. Now, Julie Morgenstern, in her book titled Never Check Email in the Morning, she writes that checking your email first thing in the morning, it sort of forces you to start off your day using the reactive parts of your brain. And it can be very difficult to switch back to those parts of your brain that you use for higher order processing, so things like creative thinking or critical analysis. And honestly, think about it. When it all comes down to it, your inbox is full of all the things that other people want you to do, all the things that are on their agendas that they need you to help them out with. But it's rarely the types of things that are going to move you forward with your agenda. So rather than spending your time working on everybody else's agenda in the morning, use that time to work on the most important and honestly what's probably the most difficult thing on your own actions list. Finally, close your inbox when you're working, or at the very least, disable the alerts that you have a new email coming in. Now, you may be concerned if maybe your boss or your colleagues or your family members may not be able to contact you if something urgent comes up. But if that's the case, just let them know to call you instead. Like if it's something that's urgent, not to use email for that. That's something that they should call you for instead. Now, we also get a lot of interruptions outside of email. I spent a lot of time focusing on email specifically because I think that's probably the most common for a lot of us, but there are also some outside of it. So what are some practical strategies for dealing with those interruptions? Well, first, the most important step is to learn how interruptions impact your day. So on tools.com, they provide this interruptions log shown here in the screenshot where you can essentially write down all of the things that interrupt you over the course of a week, and you can analyze how best to manage them. Now, for those that are maybe a little more technologically savvy, there's an app called Rescue Time that sort of runs in the background on your computer, and it keeps tabs on what you spend your time doing. It creates these pretty elaborate reports that can help you learn how to better use the time in your day. Number two, avoid electronic grazing. So this is a term that refers to maybe you're in a meeting or a lecture and you've got your mobile device out. And you're kind of tuned in to what's being said, but maybe you're also checking email or you're browsing the web. And a similar thing happens when maybe you have multiple tabs open in a web browser and you're kind of spreading your attention between the main task that you're doing, but maybe you've got alerts from Facebook or Twitter or whatever else going on there in the background that are there to disturb you. So when working, if you need to use electronic devices to get your work done, just turn off push alerts or use the do not disturb function to keep from being interrupted. Now, if you find this to be an especially hard habit to break, and certainly I have at times, there are even apps and browser extensions that will actually block you from visiting sites that you have deemed as time wasters. So things like Leech Block and Antisocial are ways to sort of block you from going to those sites during times that you need to be productive. There are also apps that will actually block your Wi-Fi access altogether during periods that you determine are like time for work. It won't allow you to access the internet. And most of these apps or these extensions are free to try, or actually you have sort of low-cost versions for the sort of the less than premium versions. Now, third, make interruptions a reward for doing productive work. Now, I just sort of alluded to, and probably what many of you guys are thinking, the lure of multitasking is a hard habit to break. So you can start by maybe splitting your time up between productive time and those activities. So for example, if you've only got an hour to work on that APhA-ASP guideline, spend 45 minutes doing solid work on that guideline, and then reward yourself with 15 minutes for social media or 15 minutes for watching TV or whatever to sort of get away from that activity for a little bit. Because although it might seem a little counterintuitive at first, especially since we just got finished talking about how interruptions can impair your productivity, scheduled breaks have actually been linked to improved productivity. If you think about it, this is sort of intuitive too. Our brain is hardwired to respond to changes in our environment. That's why things like push alerts are so effective. And honestly, you can blame it on our ancestors. Those who weren't able to quickly respond to changing stimuli, I mean, those were the people that were quickly eliminated from the gene pool. So studies have actually shown that attention and performance deteriorate significantly at about the 50 to 60 minute mark. And actually that breaks at about 45 minutes of work improve your productivity. So when you're blocking off time for doing some of those activities, rather than reserving this huge block of times for a single activity, so for example, 3 or 4 hours to study or 3 to 4 hours to work on a project, try splitting that time up into several different activities that are all about 1 to 1.5 hour blocks, and use the last bit of those blocks for your scheduled break. So this change in activity will likely improve your performance on each of those individual tasks, and the fact that you've scheduled multiple tasks in a day, it allows you to move forward on all of those projects simultaneously. So again, going going back to that calendar I showed earlier, is you'll see a lot of these are broken up into 1 hour to 1.5 hour blocks so that I can get a lot of projects worked on at once. And I try to use the last little piece of these blocks as sort of a scheduled break. And then finally, studies show that when you schedule breaks, these are better than just discretionary breaks. So try to make a habit of scheduling one when you schedule time for getting projects done. Now, just to wrap up, so I hope that I provided some useful information in tonight's webinar. As I said before, I'm definitely no expert when it comes to productivity, but I thought that I would share some of the things that I feel like have made a huge impact on my ability to get things done. And so namely, it's one, developing a systematic process for workflow. I found that that can significantly improve productivity. Two, avoiding multitasking and sort of learning how to manage interruptions, that can reduce some of those barriers to productivity. And then finally, scheduling breaks and splitting up big projects into much smaller increments can be an effective way to really optimize your performance and help you maintain focus without getting that mental fatigue that you get from working on a single project for too long at one time. So with that, I'll wrap things up and turn it over for questions before giving the mic back to Nick to finish up with some announcements for the evening. So thank you guys for sticking around and for giving me your attention tonight.
Hey, Brent, we actually do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
All right, this is from Scott. He says, with the school year, new leadership positions and already being engaged in projects, how would you recommend changing to the new inbox system?
Okay, do you mind just repeating that question real quick?
Okay, sorry about that. With the new school year, new leadership positions, and already being engaged in projects, how would you recommend changing the new inbox system?
Gotcha.
Changing to a new inbox system.
Yeah, so if you've got a lot of concurrent projects going on, it can definitely be a challenge to bring all of those projects into the new inbox system. Like I said, when I first started this process, it took me like a good weekend to get that all together, and so I imagine it could be a challenging thing if you've got a lot of concurrent projects going on. So I would maybe consider spreading out time over like a couple of days, or like maybe the evenings over 2 or 3 days to try and bring all those things in piece by piece. Maybe it's not you bring them all into the workflow system at once. Maybe you start by bringing a couple of projects into your new workflow system one night. The next night you work on a couple of other projects, but just sort of split it up so that you're integrating those one by one, because it can definitely be a pretty daunting task to sort of do it all at one time. Another strategy to do it is maybe you've got your projects split into types. So maybe you've got school-related projects, maybe you've got projects related to home, whether it's things around the house or hobbies or things like that, and maybe break that up and do your work projects first and then do your home projects the next day, and just sort of find a way to slowly integrate those all into the system. And once you've got it going, then you can process information as it enters your system as you go along. Great question.
All right. We have another question. As a leader, how much time do we budget for chapter activities?
Whoa, that's that is a tough question. Honestly, I think that's an answer that is very individual specific and chapter specific, and I think partly based on the specific position that you're doing. I think everybody sort of has a variety of different things that are competing for their time and energy. One of the things that I mentioned earlier in the presentation was this sort of that work-life balance is kind of a myth, and I think that this is where it really becomes true, is that actually it's not just work and life balance. It's like your professional life, your family life, your relationship life, your hobbies life, like all those different things have to be balanced. And unfortunately, I don't really have a great answer for what it is for the individual leader. I think it really depends on the type of leadership position, the kinds of projects that you're working on, what some of those other things in your life that are pulling on your attention, your energies and effort. So sorry, I don't know that I have a great answer for that, but I can say that having a system where all of those things that are competing for your attention, whether it be personal, professional, or otherwise, if you can get those into a system that work for you, it can certainly help you organize where you're putting that time and effort.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said about that, Brent. And also, I think one of those very first steps when you're considering how much time you want to allocate to your specific position is sit down and write down your goals for the year, for the month. And depending on those goals, evaluate how realistic they seem. And that's when you can really integrate them into the workflow that you practice and that you develop with this system.
All right. We have a couple of more. So for a student, how does studying fit in the calendar?
So I don't know if Nick might want to take that question. It's been a little while since I've thought about studying, but it definitely is something that should, like any other project or any other activity, should also have time blocked off for it. So one of the things, and I don't think that it was on that specific calendar that I had there. I do schedule time for. I think unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, when you sign up to become a pharmacist, you've sort of signed yourself up to be a lifelong learner. So even if once you graduate, your knowledge about pharmacotherapy starts to become outdated pretty quickly. So you have to really stay up on the literature. And so I still schedule time to review journals, to review websites with pharmacotherapy news on it, to spend time reading studies, because I have to sort of continue to stay up on literature. And I think for a student, that would be the same thing. Just as a resident would also need to block off time. I think finding time to study, I think that requires blocking off that time as well. Now again, sort of the same thing for chapter leadership. How much time that requires is really up to the individual person, up to the individual subject. You really have to identify what's a reasonable amount of time to set aside for that. And I do think that things like having all of your calendars sync and all of your as you're planning out your week and having specific time for projects, I think that is helpful for showing you what time do you have to study, or maybe you shouldn't take on an additional project because you've already blocked that time off for studying. I think seeing that visually can help you find where to put that time for studying or other activities. So Nick, I don't know if you have some additional comments to add to that.
Yeah, for me it started when I became more organizationally involved and more involved with the profession. It really just took knowing myself and when that peak brain power was for studying, because I knew I wanted to be the most alert and the most ready to study when I was actually devoting that time to reviewing a journal article or actually studying for my therapeutics class. And for me, I know that I'm a night owl. Like right now, I'm just actually starting to really wake up. So I would do my organizational type things, the emails in the morning. I would go to class once I'd already had my cup of coffee. I'd devote that brain power to class. After class, I'd get something to eat. I would spend some time finishing up organizational things that had come up during the day. And then once I had taken a break, had dinner, I'd start up into studying again. So I really think it really starts with you knowing yourself as an individual and when you prefer to do things. And as your schedule changes, you will be forced to adapt. There was a time in class where I had classes from 8 to 12, and then the next semester I had classes from 12 to 4. It just was kind of the dynamics of our College of Pharmacy schedule, and so I had to adjust my schedule to that as well. But that's sort of how I approached it, is knowing when I studied best and really working my schedule around that, because ultimately we are here as student pharmacists, and as the school comes first, that's when we really have to understand how we work best.
All right. And we got one last one. As a student, how do I say no to a faculty member or a preceptor?
Oh, well, as a preceptor, no, I think I think you bring up a great point about potentially saying no. There's a lot of literature out there on like how to say a positive no, or how to put a project off that maybe you want to take on at some point, but maybe now is not the right time. I think there are a lot of perceptions that preceptors, perhaps we have expectations that they're a little overwhelming for students and won't be responsive to students saying that they don't have time for a project, or that maybe they have an interest, but this is not the right time to take on the project. So I think the first step is to keeping open communication with that faculty member about what you currently got time for, the things that you have going on at the time, and really setting up sort of what the expectations are. So perhaps that project that they asked you to do, maybe that wasn't an expectation of the rotation or of the class or whatever, and so you can say, well, I sort of budgeted my time accordingly, and I don't really have time for that project at this time, but it might be something I want to do later. Or if it was an expectation of the rotation, maybe it's identifying, well, maybe it requires some modifications to, maybe the deadline or either the requirements of the project or things like that. So I think there are ways to work around it, but I think the key is the setting the expectations and having that open communication with the preceptor. I can think of a few examples that I've had in the past of when students had something going on in their life, like major life issues that didn't come to light until after the fact. And I think when you're in a profession, you realize that there are things that are going on in people's lives, but you often don't find out about till after the fact. So I think being open about that up front can kind of help you and the preceptor set expectations and what can be reasonably taken on and what can't, rather than it coming at the end of the rotation or the end of the semester when maybe you're sitting before an academic review board and explaining, maybe your performance in a class or on a rotation, and all that stuff starts to come out. I think that like academic affairs departments and individual faculty have really started to focus a lot more on that and be more open and receptive to, other commitments that students may have both inside and outside of pharmacy.
All right. I think we have one more question. Yes, and I can answer that. So all the webinars will be listed under our webinar section under the chapter resource section on pharmacist.com. So give us a couple of days and we'll have this all the presentations up. I'm not too sure about this one. We have to talk to Brett to see about copyright, but all the other webinars will definitely be up there on pharmacist.com. And I believe that's it for questions.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Reed. Thank you, Lynette, for your assistance tonight. And thank all of you who are still on the webinar tonight. We ran a little bit long with some good questions, but we really do appreciate your input and your participation tonight, and also throughout the rest of webinar week. It's been quite a few webinars that we've had, and they've all been really good ones, and it's all in an effort to really complement your experiences this year, really. It all goes along with our theme this year, which is Discover Your Voice. We're really trying to offer our student pharmacists that education that's in addition to that classroom component that we always try and supplement. So this might be part of that more practical education that you can receive, that you can use now, but also during your time as a new practitioner, and really develop for yourself throughout the rest of your career. And this doesn't end this week. We've got another great webinar coming up. It's actually on September 23rd, which I will want you to hopefully mark in your calendars if you think you've got time for it. But it's called From Supervised to Supervisor. And again, it's just focusing on that development outside of the classroom. It's on Tuesday, September 23rd from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and that's Eastern Time. and it's a continuation of our APhA New Practitioner Network collaboration component of our webinar series. So again, thank you all for staying up with us tonight, and we'll go ahead and let you go. Everyone have a great night.